This is Hockey Unfiltered with Todd Lewis.
Welcome to the weekend. It's Hockey Unfiltered with Todd Lewis. We're getting to the end of March. We're getting close to the end of the NHL regular season. 3 weeks to go. We're doing a little best of again this weekend because Todd's schedule is a little bit busy, but we will be back. Live shows again next Saturday and Sunday, 11 Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, but we've found some more good stuff in the archives over the last few months. Boy, we've covered an awful lot of ground this season, as you would expect with the NHL season. Plodding along at close to 1,300 games before the season is over, and that's just for the regular season. Then we'll get into 2 months of playoffs, and it's going to be fun over the next few weeks to look at the teams that are, well, improving, kind of peaking at the right time of year. And we've also seen a few teams over the last little while that are just kind of, you expected something from them. This push to the playoffs thing that gets pushed forward and promoted at this time of year, every year. We really haven't seen it from a few teams. The push for the playoffs began actually some months ago for other teams in the NHL, but it'll be interesting to see how the final standings shake out over the next couple of weeks. At Hockey Unfiltered, at Todd Lewis Sports, our Twitter and Instagram handles. We invite you to check out our website, check out our Facebook page as well. Always put some interesting stories and things that you might be finding quite interesting and intriguing and help make you think a little bit up on our Facebook page as well. A few stories from this past week that I wanted to get into and talk about. Some of them I might have touched on a little bit during our Little Saturday podcast. That's our podcast that drops every Wednesday afternoon. It's a little weekend in the middle of the week, and we just like to keep the hockey conversation going. But it's been an interesting week. The Dallas Stars, one of those teams that everybody thought, well, what happened to the Dallas Stars? Remember the bold predictions at the start of the year? Oh yeah, Dallas Stars, they're the most improved team. 0 for 6 on their road trip. Yeah, okay, they got a couple of loser points, but they lost all 6 games. And I don't know if there's going to be enough chance to get back into this thing for the Dallas Stars. Colorado has continued to play better than I thought. It's going to be intriguing to see what happens out west. Chicago has been officially eliminated. Let the speculation begin about the future of Stan Bowman, Joel Quenneville, and everybody almost on the Chicago Blackhawks roster going forward. Last year, remember, was unacceptable. Well, this year certainly got to be pretty unacceptable as well. I'm intrigued to see what happens with this team in the offseason. And that's going to be the story for a number of teams. What happens during the offseason? Oh, man. We haven't had any coaches dismissed through the NHL regular season. I expect we will as soon as the regular season is over. There could be a Black Monday, kind of the way it works in the National Football League. As soon as the regular season's over, boom, the axe comes out and a bunch of coaches get chopped. We could see the same thing this year. I think it's going to be really an intriguing offseason. And I'm interested to watch teams as we get towards the playoffs in 3+ weeks' time. Watch out west. Watch the San Jose Sharks. They're the sneaky team. They're the sleeper team, if you want to call them that, out west. I know Vegas has been the darling story all year with that incredible first half of the season, the amazing home record. As I said, they have slowed down a little bit in the second half of the season, and that's perfectly understandable. They're in good shape. They've topped 100 points. Everything will be fine for them to get into the playoffs, but watch out for San Jose in that division. They have just had themselves quietly a pretty good year, even with some struggles early on with Martin Jones. He was battling injury and battling the puck. He's come back strong, especially since All-Star break. They've been doing it without Joe Thornton. I don't know that Joe Thornton's coming back, and fingers crossed that he does, because it would be an awful way for him to end his season and potentially his career in San Jose if he doesn't come back this year. But watch out for San Jose out west. I think it's going to be really interesting. The talk in the early part of last week, of course, was goaltender interference and the NHL general managers, who I'm beginning to think day by day have far too much say, have far too much authority, and this is something that I think we should be looking at. They have recommended a change that looks like it'll be instituted in time for the playoffs. The Situation Room, which makes me giggle every time I say it, the Situation Room will now make the final call on goaltender interference. There will be a retired referee in the room to offer input, and there will still be communication with the referees on the ice, but it will be the fellas in the video review office that make the final decision. Does anybody think that this is really going to solve the problem, that this is really going to help? It's not. It's not. And I'll give you the best example of it. It occurred the same night that there was the change being made, and it was announced that it was going to happen. Evgeny Malkin crashes into Carey Price in a game between Pittsburgh and Montreal, and the goal is still allowed to stand. It bounced off Malkin, even though Malkin was kind of bowling through the blue paint and into Carey Price. So whether it is the referees on the ice, or whether it is an assortment of eyeballs in the situation room, whether it's one person or a couple of persons on any given night, does it matter who makes that call, that the goal stands? Does it matter that the call is made from an office in Toronto versus the officials on the ice? As the presentations and videos and flowcharts and Excel spreadsheets dictated, there's probably about a half a dozen calls that referees and the situation room might have disagreed with this year. The problem isn't with who makes the call. The problem is with communication and information. Coaches, players, executives, and most importantly, fans don't know whether a call is going to be ruled a goal or the goal is going to be taken away on any given night in any given game, and that has nothing to do with who's making the call. It is the lack of communication and information and explanation. Simply citing the time of the play on the ice and cutting and pasting the rule book notation onto social media, onto the web, does not offer an explanation. It has no help whatsoever in terms of people understanding why the call was made. If I am waiting for an airplane at a gate and nobody says anything, but the boarding time passes and the departure time passes, all I do is get more and more frustrated. If I'm sitting at home and watching a game and I see a ruling made one way or the other and I get no explanation, all I get is frustrated. It's the same thing. The NHL, for those discipline videos from the Department of Player Safety, shows the incident from multiple angles, shows the rule, does an explanation as to the hearing and what was said back and forth and the reason why a suspension is ruled that way. No such thing is done with goaltender interference. You may not agree with the call, but in terms of the suspensions or fines that are levied by the Department of Player Safety, you know and you understand why the ruling is made. That's the problem. The problem is communication, information, and operating in transparency. And right now, the league ain't doing it. So I'm anxious to see, once we get into the NHL playoffs and there's a goalie interference call in the opening round, probably in the first couple of nights, and the same kind of lack of explanation is provided, you're going to have the same controversy and it's going to stir up all over again, except you won't have GMs and you won't have coaches speaking out about it quite as loudly. Because I will assure you that the gag order went out. Shut up about this. Call it, we're trying to get more consistency, all you want. That's not the problem. A couple other things I wanted to get into before we get into some of our best of segments from this week. Another good one involving Josh Smith and scouting the refs, by the way, as well, particularly timely, what with all this goaltender interference talk. Players coming back from injury, there have been a few this past week. Austin Matthews came back and roared back into the lineup as he usually does with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Carey Price, as mentioned in the situation with Evgeny Malkin, he came back after missing a substantial period of time. And the discussion now is, well, do we want players, if they're healthy and there's only a couple of weeks left, should they really be coming back? Shouldn't we rest them more? Shouldn't we really get them extra healthy? There's been no research and no documentation proven that whatever the injury is, if you sit out longer than the injury requires, your chance of health in the future is better. I mean, if you're healthy, whether it's a broken bone, whether it's a head injury, concussion, even if you are deemed healthy, you pass all the protocols, you go through all the tests, you're deemed to be healthy and able to play, sitting out longer doesn't necessarily make you less likely to get injured in the future. So if players are healthy, I want them back in the lineup. Don't we always hear that? Oh, I missed this player. I want to see this player. You want to see the Stars or whoever it is back in the lineup. Another note in terms of protection and player safety as well. As I saw a couple of instances of this in the last week or so, Derek Forbert, I believe, of the LA Kings took a skate across and was cut in his ear. Patrick Laine got a bit of a cross check a few games back in Winnipeg. Again, across the side of the head. Too many players are not wearing that ear protection that is available on helmets. You see Sidney Crosby wearing it. You see one or two other players wearing it. It should be mandatory. All players should be wearing it. You could avoid a serious injury and serious problems by wearing that little bit of ear protection. Whether it's a puck, whether it's a stick, or hopefully not a skate, that is dangerous, and you can really help yourself. But I'm sure players don't like it because, it doesn't look good, doesn't look cool. And that is important to players because I've heard them say it before, which is startling to me. Another thing to make note of this weekend is the Canadian Women's Hockey League Championship, which is taking place on Sunday. The Clarkson Cup takes place on Sunday. And it's an interesting story because it's being brought out that there is, again, the discussion, or should be discussion, and why are there more than one women's hockey league? Canadian Women's Hockey League and the NWHL based in the United States. The CWHL is the older of the two, and both leagues share a team in Boston. And it's going to become hopefully more of a topic and hopefully generates more discussion about amalgamating the two parties. There isn't room for two women's hockey leagues. I'm glad that there are professional women's hockey leagues, and if they can generate more revenue and pay their players a little bit better. I mean, the amount of money that these players make, they're not able to make a full-time living, and it's a shame. But I think if the two parties can come together and form one strong league and perhaps tie in a little closer with the National Hockey League, wouldn't that be better for everyone? We've seen some teams have an association. In fact, the Pagulas in Buffalo have purchased the Buffalo franchise. Let's see more of that, and let's see the two leagues come together. Cassie Campbell-Pascal, who will be working on the coverage this weekend, in fact, resigned as one of the governors of the CWHL because she wanted to speak out about it and draw attention to it and have the two leagues come together. Let's do that. Let's make it stronger. Let's make a viable women's hockey league where the players can get paid a little bit better so that they can make a living and don't have to work 2 and 3 other jobs just to try to make ends meet. I think it would be good for the game, helping grow the game, and helping promote women's hockey as well. I really do think it would be good. But that's a bunch of the stuff that we're going to be keeping an eye on. Oh, and the weird goal of the week, if you haven't seen it yet, check out the video clip. Cam Ward of the Carolina Hurricanes goes behind the net to stop the puck in a game the other night against Arizona. Puck gets caught in his skate and he doesn't realize it. Skates back out in front of his net, looking around for the puck. Goes into the butterfly, puts the puck behind the goal line. It's still stuck in his skate. But the puck crossed the goal line. That is an own goal. And regrettably, doesn't that just kind of sum up the season and kind of the way the luck has gone for the Carolina Hurricanes? We'll be interested to watch and see what happens this week and in the final couple of weeks of the NHL regular season. Looking for a great run down the stretch, and then we'll be back again with you live next Saturday and Sunday, 11 Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, at Hockey Unfiltered, at Todd Lewis Sports, the Twitter and Instagram handles. Check out our website, check out our Facebook page as well. And now, after a break, we'll enjoy some of the best of segments from this past season. This is the Sunday edition of Hockey Unfiltered with Todd Lewis. Join us every Saturday and Sunday, 11 Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific at hockeyunfiltered.com, streaming live in the Hockey Unfiltered app, at Hockey Unfiltered, at Todd Lewis Sports, the Twitter and Instagram handles to follow us. Later on in the program coming up, Kevin Kurz from the Athletic San Francisco, a little San Jose Sharks talk, and also our regular Sunday visit from Stephen Laidlaw, the managing editor of DobberHockey.com, with this week's Fantasy 5, hashtag Fantasy 5. Happy to welcome to the program. We always enjoy the conversation. We meander around the National Hockey League talking about teams and who knows what else, because I don't plan anything going into it. You can check his content out on sportsnet.ca, on Vice Sports, and follow him on Twitter at DownGoesBrown. Sean McInDoe joins us. You had the game of the night yesterday with the Winnipeg Jets and the Tampa Bay Lightning. I don't know if everybody else watched that one, but I thought it was fantastic. Two really good teams going back and forth, and you pegged it yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Jets are having quite possibly their best season, certainly since they came back to Winnipeg, and maybe their best season in Winnipeg at all, which I'll grant you is not a very high bar when you look at the history of this team, at least once they got to the NHL and out of those WHA days. But these fans have been waiting for something like this for a long time, and this isn't necessarily a surprise or a fluke. They've been building a real good young core for years and years and years now. And we've all kind of been waiting and wondering when it was finally going to click. And this seems to be the year. The one, I don't even know if you call it a criticism, but the one thing you might point out when you look at this year's team is they really hadn't had any, for lack of a better term, signature wins. They hadn't had much in the way of those games where you say, okay, they just made a statement out there. They did have the one blowout over the Penguins, and certainly you have to keep that one in mind. But other than that, it's, you look down the list of teams they've beat, and it's a lot of teams that are kind of in the middle, and that's not necessarily their fault because everyone's in the middle these days. I mean, there are so few opportunities to really go out there and make a statement. And last night was one of them, and they didn't end up getting the win. Did get a point. It probably would have liked to have come away with two and sort of showing that they could go in and beat the league's number one team in their own building. But they hung with them, and if you watch that game, you certainly didn't come away thinking that this Jets team was overmatched or playing above their heads at all. And in the big picture, that's a good sign for them.
I agree with you. There's a lot of talent and there's a lot of skill on that Winnipeg Jets team. Connor Hellebuck has taken a significant leap forward this year in terms of consistency in his goaltending. He's been great. They haven't taken as many bad penalties and then had to put up with the bad penalty kill once they were a man down. But they have played really, really well. And I think it would be good for the league. I was talking about this just a little earlier in the hour, that if they can go deep in the playoffs to kind of introduce some of these players to the league, whether it's a Nikolai Ehlers or Patrick Laine, Mark Scheifele, who doesn't get as much attention. Blake Wheeler gets a bit of attention, but not as much. They have some really skilled and talented players who are going to be very good for a long time. And I think that would be good for the league to push those superstars out.
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of get hung up on, sometimes the geography or the market size. And we say, well, this isn't a team that necessarily the NHL wants to see do well because they're not a great big TV market or they're not this or that. These days, fans will get behind talent. They'll get behind stories to watch. And the Jets have been all those things. It's just, as you say, a question of getting them in front of enough eyes. And, that's certainly something that the league can work on doing. But until this year, they have not won a playoff game since they came back to Winnipeg. And you do have to earn that attention a little bit. And they're in the process of doing that. And you're right. There's no better way to do it than to see them go into the playoffs and go on a bit of a deep run. And I tell you, you look at what happened with the Predators last year, where they kind of got on a lot of people's radar. Not just the team, but the market itself. And people were so impressed with the response of those crowds there and the fans. Wait and see what you get if you see something similar in Winnipeg, because I was out there for the first playoff game back a few years ago when they were up against the Ducks. And, it's not hyperbole for me to say that was the loudest building I have ever been in and have ever heard. And considering it's one of the smaller buildings in the league, that's really saying something. And I think if people enjoyed that Predators run and that Predators story last year, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves here. But certainly the Jets doing something similar could draw some comparisons.
Well, just to carry on with that point too, then I also mentioned that Columbus would be another great team to see them go deep, to have a nice long playoff run, similar kind of thing, a devoted fan base to a group that's there. St. Louis would be another good one, who haven't gone super deep in the playoffs for a long time, have threatened and had good teams. That would be another one. This is good for the league. And again, it's not a slight against Pittsburgh or Chicago or LA, but having a new crop of fresh, talented young stars that you can promote and push out as faces of the league, if there are more of them, then it benefits everyone.
Yeah, and this kind of gets to the debate that we have sometimes with the NHL of, how much parity is too much, and is it better to have a league where you've got 31 teams that are all pretty close to each other, or is it better to have these kind of super teams that we see in other sports? You know, we talk about this in the NBA. We're talking about it right now with Major League Baseball with what the Yankees are putting together. And you know, I know there's a lot of people who look back on older times in the NHL and they say, man, those 1970s Canadians or those 1980s Oilers, that was all sorts of fun having having a team that was just running over the league like that. And maybe they would point to a team like the Blackhawks or the Penguins today as kind of the modern equivalent and say it's good for the league if there's a clear-cut top dog that you've got to knock off. And you know, I see that argument, and I think a lot of times I kind of find myself leaning towards that side of it. But there is certainly something to be said for knowing that different markets around the league can get into that contending picture and can get towards the top of that pile and have a legitimate shot to maybe knock off some of those big dogs. I mean, you look at a team like the Blue Jackets, you're right. I mean, this franchise has been waiting years and years for their chance in the spotlight, and right now, even though the standings may not necessarily say so, we know that the path out of Metro goes through Pittsburgh. Well, I mean, that would be a great matchup to have, the Blue Jackets looking to finally establish themselves and get that signature win of their own up against the defending two-time champs, who aren't gonna give up that mantle very easily. You know, stuff like that. To me, those are the good stories where you've got not necessarily the underdog, but the team that maybe hasn't been there before and is trying to establish themselves that way, and put them up against a team that's been on top for a little while. And as a very wise man once said, to be the man, you got to beat the man, and it kind of works that way with teams too. And again, we don't want to look too far ahead as playoff matchups and all of that sort of stuff, but there's some real fun scenarios that might be looming out there this year.
Sean McInDoe is our guest in Hockey Unfiltered with Todd Lewis. Follow him on Twitter at DownGoesBrown. You can catch his stuff on Sportsnet.ca, on Vice Sports, and as mentioned, at DownGoesBrown is how you follow him on Twitter. You said 31 even teams in the National Hockey League, and after the Board of Governors meeting last week, it looks like it won't be long before there is a 32nd team in the National Hockey League. Seattle is going to be allowed to submit an application. The renovation deal has been done for Key Arena to the tune of $600+ million. Is this all positive? Is this all good? Or are some still upset that we're expanding and there shouldn't be more? And why not Quebec City?
Well, I mean, I think that last question is the key one, the Quebec City one. I mean, we all have known that this league was going to get to 32 teams. You're not going to expand your way to 31 and then stop with an odd number and different size divisions. It just made too much sense that they would have to find that 32nd team to even it out. And unfortunately for Quebec City, it also became apparent over the years that there really seemed to be a strong preference to make sure it was a city out west, so that you could balance out the conferences. And we can have that argument of did the league do the right thing moving both Detroit and Columbus over a couple years ago and creating that imbalance? And is this a situation that maybe if they had played that differently, there'd be different options? But the reality is, I think it's been clear that the league has wanted to go to a Western-based U.S. team, and they've been a Western-based U.S. market, and they've been waiting for the right situation to appear. I think they thought it was going to happen with Seattle at the same time it did with Vegas. I think that going to 31 teams for even a couple of years was a plan B. But now it looks like the arena situation's figured out. It looks like the ownership's in place, and I think this just makes too much sense. I mean, you look even over the history of this league, they've come pretty close to Seattle on a few different occasions, and obviously Seattle does have some history with the game going way back as a one-time Stanley Cup winner, even before the NHL appeared on the scene. So I think this is not necessarily a sure thing to work. Expansion never is, but I think it makes too much sense not to give it a shot. And unfortunately, if you're Quebec City, I think at this point, you look at a league with 32 teams and 4 nice even divisions, and you think it may be a little while before expansion comes knocking again. And so now we get to that unpleasant conversation where if you want to have a team, it might be a case of finding some existing team somewhere that's not working out and figuring out a way to lure them away.
I don't think that's necessarily the wrong recipe for Quebec City, though. I would love to see a team go back to Quebec City because I'm old enough, just old enough to have gone to a Montreal Canadiens and Quebec Nordiques game at the Forum, and it was spectacular. But I just with the price tag for an expansion team now being 650 million bones, that's a lot of dollars. That's US dollars too, and I think it's more feasible for Quebec City to be a relocation. And if you are the NHL, having that ace in the hole of Quebec City building ready to go at a slightly more reasonable relocation fee, I think could work out nicely in the long run. I think that's the key, is just keep looking long down the road, because, well, Jerry Bruckheimer and his group have been talked about for years and years as potential owners. And now it looks like it's finally getting close.
Yeah, and you know, and I'm with you, and in that big picture, long term, maybe this is in a way good news for Quebec City if you're a fan who wants to see the game back there. The one caveat I would put on that is I do think that there is a difference between being an option and just being a threat that the league can use to wave over any other market where they need a new arena, or they want to do something different with ownership, or, you know, if Quebec City becomes this boogeyman that Gary Bettman and the NHL can pull out as a credible threat, but never actually intend to use, I do think that fans in Quebec are pretty smart, and I think they will be able to figure out very quickly if they are being used here, or whether there's an actual realistic shot. And if it's the former, I think you might see that enthusiasm drain away very quickly.
No, that's fair. You can't just you can't cry wolf the way that has happened in the past. Just before I let you go, because I know you're such a big fan, are the Maple Leafs for real this year? They had a nice victory in Pittsburgh. They held on for the victory in Pittsburgh, but there's another team. If they go for a long distance in the playoffs, that would be super good for the National Hockey League as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think they're for real in the sense of that they are pretty much what the standings say they are right now, which is a good team, not a very top-tier team. I know there was about a month into the season, suddenly you had the odds makers saying that the Leafs were the favorite to win the Stanley Cup. And I wrote a piece at the time. I said, hold on, this is too much too soon. They're not quite there yet. And they've sort of taken a bit of a step back and settled into to maybe a second tier behind the Tampas and some other teams. And I think that's about right. But I mean, you look at the way, not just the way that team is playing, but the way that division is shaping up, where, I mean, you've got Tampa and Toronto, and then it's an absolute mess below that. You know, it's not too early if you're a Toronto Maple Leafs fan to look at this and say, you know, not only should we make the playoffs this year, we should make the playoffs. We should have home ice advantage, and we should have a very winnable matchup in that first round at least. And, you know, maybe that sets up a second round matchup with the Lightning where they'd be underdogs, but they'd have a shot at that one too. So, you know, this is a situation where, you know, whenever a rebuild happens, it's kind of like, all right, you gotta go in steps. Last year was step one to make the playoffs. You know, step two is you got to win a round or two. It really is shaping up to be a year where it certainly looks like that is something that could and maybe even should happen for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Sean McInDoe, Down Goes Brown is how you follow him on Twitter. Check out his content on sportsnet.ca, on Vice Sports, and other areas. Always good conversation, Sean. I really appreciate the time, and hopefully we can do it again soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Sean McInDoe from Sportsnet and Vice Sports. At Down Goes Brown, how you follow him on Twitter. Boy, oh boy, Leafs going for long distance in the playoffs. That would be something. I'm trying to remain positive about the Seattle thing. I know Quebec City will feel Sean, and Sean brings up a terrific point too about, you know, you just can't be the rooster tease for everyone every time there's an issue, and oh well, we'll relocate. There was a great tweet, I think it was Michael Farber, who tweeted out that Centre Videotron, which is the name of the building in Quebec City, Centre Videotron is French for Cops Coliseum, which is the building in Hamilton which was used as the tease for teams. Oh well, we may have to move to Hamilton. They had their cord pulled so many times and never really came to much in terms of relocation to that city. At Hockey Unfiltered, at Todd Lewis Sports, the Twitter and Instagram handles to follow us. We're flying through hour number one, a busy second hour coming up as well. Lots more to come on the Sunday edition. Hockey Unfiltered with Todd Lewis back after the break. Hockey Unfiltered with Todd Lewis, the Sunday edition, here every Saturday and Sunday, 11 Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific at hockeyunfiltered.com, streaming live on the Hockey Unfiltered app. It's powered by Primetime Radio. Before the hour is out, Stephen Laidlaw, the managing editor of DobberHockey.com, will be with us for this week's Fantasy 5, hashtag Fantasy 5, some help for you in your fantasy hockey pool. Pleased to welcome him back to North America after a whirlwind tour of the Olympics, and also want to get some thoughts on the outdoor game last night from Stephen Whyno, who covers the National Hockey League for the Associated Press. Follow him on Twitter at @SWhyno, and he joins us on the line now. Steve, just give me your thoughts first of all on the game itself. I like the outdoor games. I wasn't big on the all-white uniforms. They're not my thing, but they're great. They're a spectacle. Caps clearly were the better team in this game, but there were always people that think, oh, these are not very good, and why do we have so many? But they draw attention, they make money, and it's probably a pretty positive thing to do for your league.
Sure, and it is. And if it wasn't for maybe the power outage with 10 minutes left and a lot of NBC affiliates switching over to local news over the game, it's good exposure for the NHL in a country where it does get overshadowed by the NFL and other sports, that you get a spotlight like that and you get the pageantry of Naval Academy and those sort of things. There's a positive benefit to that. And for 2 periods, it was a good game. It was back and forth and a lot of goals early on in this game. It was fun. The third period kind of anticlimactic. A lot of fans had left at that point, but certainly an entertaining game to say the least.
Yeah, especially early on. I was hopeful in the first period that we were perhaps going to see the highest scoring outdoor game ever, but it seemed as though it started to shift towards the Washington Capitals in the second period, and then in the third period, I got the feeling at times that both teams would just kind of like it to be over. I'm curious though that a lot of people had left in the third period, as you said. Is that because of the temperatures, the weather, the cool? It just kind of had dragged on too long. I'm a little curious about that.
Sure, and I think it was a lopsided result combined with the weather more than anything. It was windy, it was cold. Certainly down in the stands, the conditions weren't great. Players said it was okay, and not terribly windy. But certainly when you've got fans there and it's a 5-2 game, and then you've got the delay in the third period, I understand why people kind of called it a night rather early in that game. I wouldn't have. I'm not a leave early kind of person very often if I'm going to a game as a fan, but I understand that. But you know what? For 2 periods, it was a very entertaining game, and you can see why the Leafs have a future. You can see why the Capitals have been such a good team for such a long time. And as Mike Babcock said, they still see us as kids, and they looked like kids last night. That was a show of force by a veteran Capitals team used to outdoor games and really raising their game to a big stage like that.
Yeah, and I think you're going to naturally wonder, I think too, would the fate of the Maple Leafs been a little bit different if Austin Matthews had been in the lineup? Because we saw what a force he was in the outdoor game last year that they played against the Detroit Red Wings, but also what a force he can be. And would the result of this game had been different? And to your point as well, that's why the Leafs have such a promising future. Sure,
and Austin Matthews, we knew he wasn't going to be in this game. The shoulder injury is going to knock him out at least for the Buffalo game on Monday, but the depth is there. Once Austin Matthews is back, they can go Matthews, Kadri, Bozak, Buchanan right down the middle, and that's an unbelievable amount of depth for this team. Austin Matthews, we know he's a star. He still leads the team in goals despite missing 13 games this year. It might have been very different.
The other thing that I think is interesting, and the reason to be optimistic about the Maple Leafs, is Mike Babcock in his comments post-game saying they look at us and think we're still kids, and it's time that we put in the work that we didn't do last night. He's expecting them to practice today and kind of pushing a day off back, because he understands that this is maybe an opportunity for his team to learn and to grow and to take another step forward.
And it should be, and understandably, like, this was not a good performance by the Maple Leafs last night. And I understand why Mike Babcock would say, you know what, we're going to practice today. And this is a young team, and this is the coach who's signed for a long time, who's ready to teach lessons to very young players, probably needed at this point in their career.
The other part of the equation, of course, the Washington Capitals, as you mentioned, a veteran team, a talented team, now a couple of points ahead of the Philadelphia Flyers in the Metropolitan Division. I don't know. It still seems like this is a little bit of a surprise to see the Caps on top of that division. We were all curious at the start of the year what they would be like. We've seen them continue to get better as the season has moved along, and I don't know. Maybe this is the year after all the pressure's off the Washington Capitals that they have their most successful run in the postseason.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Barry Trotz has said is maybe they're under the radar, and that's not a terrible thing right now. They don't have the pressure of being championship contenders. They don't have to be that. But this is a good team, and if Braden Holtby and Alex Ovechkin are great, this team can win the Stanley Cup this year.
And I want to talk about Alex Ovechkin too, because yes, he's got 40 goals, and yes, he's leading the scoring race, but I'm still not sure that it's recognized as to how good and talented a player he is when he is out on the ice. And his enthusiasm, as much as anything, is still there.
He is, and he's going to get 50 goals this season at this point. That's where we're sitting on right now. We said last night, 40 goals is good. 50 is better, and he really does have a chance at this point to score 50. And at age 32, that's an impressive showing. Like, guys don't do this. Like, this is just Ovechkin, Jerome McGinley, and Mike Bossy. Like, guys don't do this the way Ovechkin scores like this.
No, it's been fun to watch. So where do you see their biggest challenge coming from in the Metropolitan Division? Is it going to be Pittsburgh, or is Philadelphia going to continue to surprise?
Yeah, you know what? It's such an unpredictable division at this point. You don't know whether the Penguins or the Flyers, Devils, the Blue Jackets, the Hurricanes can make the playoffs at this point. And it really, at this point, it comes down to matchups. And if they get the Penguins in the first round, it's going to be tough. The Flyers, I think they could beat in the first round series. But you know what? This is the Capitals every year. Is they have a chance to win a Stanley Cup, or they have a chance to lose in the first round. And they certainly have the talent to go far in the playoffs, but it's going to depend on what matchup they're able to draw in the first two rounds.
Stephen Whyno is our guest, covers the National Hockey League for the Associated Press. At @Whyno is how you follow him on Twitter. Stephen was also at the Olympics, and I'm not sure if you know what time zone you're in yet, but give us kind of an overview as someone who was at the Olympics and got the Olympic experience on the men's side, first of all, minus the National Hockey League players. From my standpoint, it clearly wasn't a best on best tournament. It was the best description I heard was kind of, it's a Spengler Cup where a number of teams are assembled at the last minute, and that's about the caliber level that we saw.
Yeah, and it was less than a World Championships too. You didn't have the NHL players joining from the playoffs. There's certainly that aspect of it, but you did have a competition level that was high because it was unpredictable, and it was a kind of a mix of junior hockey and the AHL in a little bit of a way that you didn't know exactly what was going to happen from game to game, and that's what made it fun. I think it actually made it more entertaining than at least more unpredictable than the NHL guys, because you didn't know what was going to happen, and Germany almost pulled it off. But you're right. I mean, in terms of quality of play, it probably was like a Spengler Cup. It probably was like a low-grade World Championships.
Yeah, and is that going to be satisfactory moving forward, though? I mean, personally, I think that they'll be back in 4 years. But would that be satisfactory to have that same kind of tournament moving forward?
No, probably not. And this is why the IOC and the IHF really need the NHL in this. Like there's no going about it now. Attendance was down, interest was down. It's certainly a non-hockey country like South Korea, and we're going to have the same thing in China, that you need the NHL players to draw people in. So as much as it was fun to see the stories of kind of these guys and where they come from to get to that point, no, I don't think the IHF wants that moving forward. And I think they know they need Sidney Crosby and Connor McDavid and Patrick Kane and these guys to be in the Olympics, to kind of draw the interest that the Olympics really, like an Olympic hockey tournament actually deserves. Is you need these kind of guys.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that it's going to come without a little pain in some direction of the players and or the league at some point. Do you agree?
Yeah, and that's why the CBA and the potential lockout in 2020 bears watching, because it's going to be interesting to see how much players care about this, honestly, because it's a situation that affects really about 300 guys of a 700 player membership, and maybe even less than that. So how much are you willing to give up as players to guarantee going to the Olympics when you know the NHL kind of wants to go to China, and if the Olympics are in Calgary in 2026, that's an easy go decision for them. And Garrett continues to saber rattle certainly about, we're not sure we want to go to China, But I do think there's an interest in China. The NHL is hosting games there. I think there's a benefit for the league long term in going to Beijing. And the question is, who blinks first in the game of chicken for the CBA in 2020 potentially, where we could have a lockout in the same year as Seattle expansion team again. So who has the leverage now between the players and the league, with potentially a Seattle expansion team coming, with the Olympics looming, with escrow hanging over players, and they're very much not happy about it. And who has the control there? Because I think we all want to see NHL players in Beijing and not this kind of tournament again. But it's fun to see a one-off of this, but I don't think we want to see it become a pattern.
Yeah, I agree with you. Now that we've had all the negatives, let's talk about the positives and the incredible accomplishment of the women's Olympic team in getting that victory over Team Canada. And even though it occurred live at about 2:00 in the morning before the game was finally decided in that shootout, it seems as though there were a lot of people that have seen it. Perhaps a number of them watched it on the replay because NBC did replay the game the next day. But this is something that will help push and grow women's hockey and Olympic caliber hockey in general, I think, too.
It should. And this was the same thing that happened in 1998, where a lot of the players on this team were inspired to start playing hockey or really cared deeply about playing professional hockey and playing at the Olympics because that 1998 U.S. team won the gold medal in Nagano. And the Cami Granado and that team was such an inspiration for these players that they really do hope. And I spoke with McInDoe about this yesterday. She has a cereal box from 1998 autographed and really decided at that point she wanted to play on that team at the Olympics. Now she's on a cereal box herself. And now she hopes she's the inspiration for future generations of women's players to get more girls playing hockey. And that's going to be a long-term benefit. And it's going to be interesting to see how these women turn what is a great victory tour, media tour, Ellen, Today's Show, the Stadium Series game last night, into long-lasting fame. How do you become stars like Mia Hamm and Lisa Leslie and Diana Taurasi did from their championships at the Olympics to the World Cup? How do you turn that into long-lasting success where you're relevant? Like, all Olympians have the issue of how do you stay relevant in non-Olympic years? And if they're able to stay kind of in the national focus in some way, they're champions. People love them. People were chanting USA, USA in the parking lot yesterday. And people love winners in this country, and nationalism is certainly there. And these women they deserve so much respect because of the boycott threat, because of the contract they earned from USA Hockey, that I think there is a potential there that this is a groundswell of movement toward helping women's hockey grow and become a real, like, sort of like the WNBA professional league in the United States and Canada.
Well, I was going to say that they deserve admiration and their inspirations in more than just being talented hockey players, in championing for equal treatment and equal rights as well. And that's the other part of it that you're right, may be at least as big a story as their Olympic gold medals.
Sure, and that's the part of the story that makes it a fairy tale. That's the part of the story that makes it a real story, is that not only do they win, but this is the completion of a journey. And you talk to these players about kind of what they've done on the ice, what they've done off the ice. It matters more to them what they've done off the ice in terms of earning this contract than it probably does for them to win a gold medal. I'm not saying they don't appreciate winning a gold medal, but the journey to earn a contract is probably more valuable in the long term than winning a tournament.
Stephen Whyno, covering the National Hockey League and previously the Olympics for the Associated Press. @SWhyno is how you follow him on Twitter. Thanks so much for the time today, Stephen. I always appreciate and enjoy it, and I hope we can do it again soon.
Thanks, Todd. Talk to you soon.
Stephen Whyno from the Associated Press. Great accomplishment. And yes, the U.S. Olympic women's team honored for their victory over Team Canada to secure gold in Pyeongchang. It's a great accomplishment. @Hockey Unfiltered, @Todd Lewis Sports, Twitter and Instagram handles. Before the top of the hour, Stephen Laidlaw will join us, the managing editor of DobberHockey.com, with this week's Fantasy 5, some help for you in your fantasy hockey pool. I have a question for Stephen as well. A little concerned. Saw something that he, I believe, said on Twitter last night. I'm a little concerned, and I'm a little bit worried about it. So we'll ask about that. A few other stories as well. We'll look ahead to some of the games on today's schedule and this week's coming schedule as well, and whatever else we can squeeze in the next 30 minutes or so. Hockey Unfiltered with Todd Lewis, back with more after the break. This is Hockey Unfiltered with Todd Lewis. It's the Saturday edition. Here Saturdays and Sundays, 11 Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, live at hockeyunfiltered.com, streaming live on the Hockey Unfiltered app, at Hockey Unfiltered, at Todd Lewis Sports, Twitter and Instagram handles to reach us. Alan Bestwick from ESPN ABC will join us before the top of the hour. We are pleased now to welcome back our friend from scoutingtherefs.com. You can follow him on Twitter at scoutingtherefs. A great informational website and resource, the website, and of course, great conversation online and at Twitter as well with Josh. Josh, I'm not sure where to start. Are you prepared for anything today?
You have to be, right? There's always a lot going on.
Okay, you know what? I want to start with something that I saw again last night, and I have seen a couple of times this week. And it's funny how these visits with you line up when I always have a question. I have seen this instance or this situation a few times this season. Sometimes I have seen it called a penalty. Sometimes I have not seen it called a penalty. So it's probably a good one of discussion. But it happened in the Anaheim game last night where Ryan Kessler had his stick knocked out of his hands. It happened a couple of nights before when Connor McDavid knocked the stick out of the hands of Matthias Ekholm. But if you knock the stick out of a player's hands, sometimes you can see that it's a slash, but other times it's not a slash. And I've seen it called interference. Is there a way that we can look at that and best define it?
I mean, really it is. It's interference. If you're impeding the guy's ability to play the puck, if you're getting in the way, if you're knocking his stick out of his hands, it's a penalty for interference. And it's pretty clear. The rule book has it in 56-2. If you deliberately knock a stick out of your opponent's hand, it's a minor penalty for interference. So it's really up to the officials when they see the play. Was this a deliberate attempt to knock the stick out of his hand? Was this a legal stick check that happened to result in the stick coming loose? We've joked in the past, we've seen guys whose sticks go flying into the stratosphere because they're trying to draw a penalty and they've got a real loose grip on that stick and they're hoping it's going to be called. So it's really up to the officials at that moment to say, did he knock the stick away? Was this intentionally him getting rid of the guy's stick, or was he just trying to stick check, a little chop on the lower part of the stick there and not really looking to remove the stick, but to try to free up the puck. And it's a tough call. And I think that's why you see this as one of the ones that gets to be called differently depending on the night and the official.
Yeah, and I'm not being a smart ass about it because I'm asking because as you detailed nicely, there are a few different layers to it. Some guys do hold their stick very loosely, and in the process of playing a puck in conjunction with another player, the stick goes out of their hand, and it shouldn't really be called a penalty. So this is another one of the many categories of the rule book that I guess is subject to interpretation.
Yeah, and those are always the ones, when you have that gray area, that's what leads to the greatest frustration that I see is, how can you determine intent? The rule book says deliberately knock the stick out of his hands. Well, I mean, if I'm a defender, if the other guy doesn't have his stick, then yeah, I'm happier that he doesn't have a stick. But how can the official determine whether that was a deliberate stick, a deliberate attempt to remove the stick or just playing the puck or preventing him from playing the puck? And I think when you get into those gray areas or you get into intent, it becomes much, much harder for the officials.
Yeah, that's a fair point. I'm going to wade into it. Goaltender interference is perhaps the most talked about example of what is open to interpretation. There was a call that it was in the Dallas and Tampa Bay game from a couple of nights ago where the Dallas Stars tied the game up late and it looked like there may have been a case for goaltender interference. And I'm trying to remember the player. I want to say it was Tyler Seguin, but I'm not sure if it was him that seemed to have his stick between the goaltender's arms and swing him around. But again, I guess that also is part of interpretation. Is he attempting to put the puck in, or is he attempting to put the puck and or the goaltender in?
Right, because obviously you can't push the puck. You can't push the goaltender in when you're trying to push the puck in. You can play the puck, but you can't play the goalie to push his pad over the line. but the goaltender always has to have the freedom and the ability to do his job. That's the rules written. The goaltender must be able to play his position and do his job. And if something's preventing him from doing that, especially within the goal crease, that should be considered goaltender interference. So again, you look at, was this playing the puck? Was this attempting to deflect the puck? Was this attempting to impact the goaltender's ability to play? And that's where you get the judgment call of the officials looking at it real time and making that initial call. And then when they review it, do they see anything that's different that would result in them overturning it? And, more often than not, they don't. And that's as much an indication of, the official's desire to overturn his own call as more evidence supporting the call that he made in the first place, which again, here we go back to it. It's up to interpretation.
Now, there was a play a week ago in the Pittsburgh, Florida game. It was Patrick Hornquist who had a goal that was disallowed because he was swatting at the puck, and it was ruled that he pushed the goaltender and the puck across the goal line. But from my angle and viewing it, it looked like the puck was not covered by the goaltender's pad. It was in front of the goaltender's pad, and he was swatting at the puck that resulted in it crossing the line. Does it matter whether the puck is covered or not?
It certainly is going to factor in. If the goaltender has the puck covered, let's say he's trapped it on the ice in his glove and guys are whacking away at his glove, the referee is going to look at that differently than if it's a loose puck and he's whacking at it. So you then look at the other part of the equation is when he's whacking at this loose puck, or we're going to say that the puck was in play and not covered at the time. So when he's trying to play the puck, is he also inadvertently or intentionally impacting the goaltender? Is he pushing his glove beyond the goal line? Is he pushing his pad to shift his position and make him unable to stop the puck? And I think that was one of those plays where you've got a situation where the referee needs to determine all those facets. It's a loose puck, so I'm going to go with this was legal to play the puck. Now, when he plays the puck, is he just playing the puck, or is his follow through, is his momentum, is something pushing the goaltender that is preventing him from being able to do his job? And I think on that play, that's what the referee's decision had to be, that there was contact that prevented him from being able to make the save. So the playing of the puck was legal, but the impact on the goaltender was what allowed that goal to happen and why the goal was pulled back.
Gotcha. That's a great point. I hadn't thought of that. It was inevitable that his hitting the puck or swatting at the puck, trying to put it in, is also pushing the goaltender across the goal line. Correct?
That's what I'm looking at as possibilities on interpretation. Yeah. But you're going to get, especially in a play like that where you've got layers, you're going to get different interpretations from different officials. And it's not even a matter of consistency from a rule book standpoint. That's up to what are these guys seeing? Is this guy saying, hey, that's a follow through on his shot, and I'm not considering that interference, that's part of the play? Or is another guy looking at it and saying there's a stick contact with the goaltender in addition to the shot, and that is interference? I think that's where we get into challenges. And from an officiating standpoint or from a league standpoint, they're sending these examples out to the referees. On a nightly basis, the supervisors are meeting with the officials after the games. These guys are reviewing footage on their iPads. And I think, as examples like that happen, it's easy for Walcom's team to get the word out and say, look, guys, we thought this should have been a goal. We thought this shouldn't have been a goal because of these reasons. And hopefully, going forward, we can say that everybody's getting more consistent, because I don't think any of these challenges or any of these reviews are typical. We're seeing totally different plays. There's always a different wrinkle to it. And the more that they review them, hopefully, the more consistent they can get. But it's always different, and that's what makes it challenging.
Josh Smith is our guest from scoutingtherefs.com, at scoutingtherefs to follow him on Twitter. And that's what everyone is looking for, is consistency. But as you said really nicely, there's a different wrinkle, a slightly different twist, a different layer to each situation. So staying on top of it is important. Now, currently, there are no referees that are part of the video review process, at least to my knowledge. Is that something that would help with consistency in rulings?
The situation room's got some great guys in there, some real smart hockey guys, some guys with years of experience playing the game. I think they've come a long way in what they've learned when it comes to rule interpretation. Personally, I think it would help. We've got situations right now. So a coach's challenge comes up for offside, and the the linesmen make that decision in accordance with what's going on in the situation room. You look at a review for a coach's challenge for goaltender interference, and that's purely down to the on-ice officials. So the guys on the ice are making the call. It's entirely up to them. The situation room does not weigh in at all. So as far as consistency goes, it's up to the guys on the ice. And I think that's the way the officials want it. I think having a voice in the room, whether it's, one guy, two guys rotating through, I think it'd be pretty valuable. It's something that the NBA does. They have active referees rotate through their replay room, and it could be one, could be five guys, depending on how many games are scheduled that night. And those guys handle the replay reviews. So you look at it in the NHL, and maybe in your nightly rotation of officials assignments, throwing two guys in the situation room to help weigh in. I think you get two benefits. You get them weighing in on the call with the benefit of 20 screens, huge screens, and talking about it in the room there. So their input becomes valuable. And then I think they get the experience to bring back to the ice next time they're working a game to say, hey, this is what I saw in the replay room. This is what worked. This is what doesn't work. And I think there's something to be said for the knowledge they gain from spending time in that room. And personally, I think it would benefit everybody. I think it'd be a great opportunity for the officials. And I think, everybody would get a little bit more buy-in on those calls, because now you've got a referee in the room weighing in instead of just the guys on the ice looking at it on an iPad.
Sharing information would be a good thing. I got to ask you about the other one from early in the week, was Tampa and Toronto, where it was Cedric Paquette, who didn't like that there was no call on a I think it was a glove to the face from Leo Komarov. He kind of shuffled his glove in the direction of Gord Dwyer, who picked it up and then slammed it into the bench. The Tampa bench was apoplectic after that. There was an exchange after the whistle blew, and Gord Dwyer went over to have a chat with John Cooper. But this kind of thing should not happen. In fact, I'll say this kind of thing cannot happen by officials. It was a referee who became upset. And I mean, if you want to ring up Cedric Paquette for 2 or for 10, that's cool. But you can't let it go to this extreme.
Yeah, it's a tough spot. You never want to let emotion take over as an official. You can't let that get into your game. I think you make a good point there. We get frustrated with things, or you get frustrated with something that happens on the ice. But you have to remember, your job as an official, you can call a penalty, you can send the guy to the box. I mean, Paquette could have been gone for the game for that.
Yep.
Technically, if they wanted to be tough and go by the book, and I'm not surprised that they didn't, because it's pretty severe. But abusive officials carries a 3-game suspension if you throw a glove at an official. And if they really wanted to book him for that, and they thought it was egregious enough, that was a course of action that it would have been extreme, but they would have been in their rights to do it. Give him the boot, give him the automatic suspension for 3 games because he threw a glove at an official. Again, I think that's a bit extreme, but that's how you have to deal with the unsportsmanlike conduct. You want to hit the guy with just a regular 2-minute unsportsmanlike at the bench. You want to hit up Callahan, who's next to him, fine. But yeah, I think you have to try to keep the emotion out, and when all else fails, stay professional and fall back on the rule book, and try not to let personal frustrations come out that way. It was a bad look. I mean, everybody's been there, players, officials, but
sure.
it's important to keep professional.
I agree, and I think that as a group, the NHL officials, both linesmen and referees, are extraordinarily patient and understanding, and give a great deal of latitude to NHL players. But there's a time when you have to say, no, you know what? Just, I can't be emotional about this. I have to implement the rule book. And even there was a play it was Colorado and Calgary with Johnny Gaudreau, who got 2 minutes for embellishment. Now, I think it was a missed call by the referee. And there are people complaining, though, that Johnny Gaudreau got 10 minutes for got a misconduct after that. I don't think so. I think that he must have said and or done something that tipped the scale, because the referee is not going to ring him up just for the purpose of getting him out of the game.
Absolutely. I mean, I would like to think, and from talking to the guys over the years and spending time at ice level, they grant a lot of leniency to guys. When somebody's blowing off steam, and when somebody's taking it too far, and nobody's in the business of getting guys out of the game just to get them out of the game. So whatever was said was obviously over the line. And whether it was to set an example and say, look, guys, we're not going to do this the rest of the game. I'm going to give him the 10 here, or whether it was something specific that he said that crossed the line. the official had to have justification to do that. It's not something you'd want to say, and it's certainly not something they want to do to get a guy out of the game if it's not deserved. So whatever was said there was pretty extreme to get that call. And it's unfortunate for Gaudreau. There are going to be missed calls. There are going to be bad calls. Referees are human like everybody else, and you have to be a professional. And we're back to that. But with the players too. Sometimes the officials call, that's what it is. And no amount of arguing is going to get them to change it. But some amounts of arguing will get you a 10-minute misconduct.
I agree with you. He earned it in this particular case. Josh Smith is our friend from scoutingtherefs.com. At scoutingtherefs is how you follow him on Twitter. Josh, as always, great info. I always learn something when we have these conversations, and I'm sure we'll be doing it again soon. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks so much, Todd. One little piece of trivia that I have, I actually confirmed this week, which I know you will appreciate, is that word out on the ice is for the officials. By rule, you see a goal, you got to wave it off or you got to point to the goal. We don't want this ambiguity anymore. And from what I hear, the league has reminded everyone that it's time to make sure you're pointing. Either wave it off or signal goal so we know what the call on the ice was. I know that's been a beef that you've brought up before, so that's the word I'm hearing. Hopefully we'll see it in practice this weekend.
Love it. Communication is a good thing. Thanks, Josh. Really appreciate that. Thanks for throwing that in. Josh Smith, the website is scoutingtherefs.com, and it is worth a visit for all the information. At Scouting the Refs is how you follow Josh on Twitter as well. Busy Saturday with 8 games on the schedule, 7 tomorrow. We'll talk a little hockey, especially Boston Bruins, with our next guest, Alan Bestwick from ESPN and ABC. He's a big Bruins fan. We'll squeeze in some IndyCar talk as well. Hockey